here. I am not technology savvy enough to get the sound up here, so I've got to put it up as high as I can. So we'll do that. There we go. Okay. A couple of things that I think the agendas were just passed out late finally. So the first thing we're going to do today is have a presentation by Commissioner Burlington from Jefferson County. And we're not going to introduce everybody in the room, Commissioner, but Sharon Trask from Mason County is here. There she is.
Hey, Greg.
So, if you appreciate you joining us today, thank you very much. If you could give your presentation just about how you developed your strategic plan, how you developed your task force, how it's working, and maybe some things that you would have done different if you had another opportunity.
Sure. I'll go into it, and I will confess that I was not there at the onset of it. Commissioner Sullivan, who has since retired, as you might see in our 5-year plan, was the commissioner that helped start our homelessness task force. And ours has evolved quite a bit. We've renamed it and redone our ILA. I think the key tenets that we've leaned on from the beginning are recognizing that the problem is larger than any one agency or municipality could take care of. And that's that underlying truth I'm sure you guys recognize too is the housing crisis, the homelessness crisis gets ever exacerbated. So we hired I assume, and I'm not sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you guys are just getting started with the 5-year plan to take advantage of the reporting fees and start distributing those funds. And they're, of course, very restricted to homelessness, the larger body of money, and affordable housing as well. And bringing stakeholders in from the housing providers, folks with lived experience, and community advocates that have often been in tension with the efforts of the city and the county in previous times was, I think, the hallmark of the partnership that we developed. We did hire a contract facilitator that helped us coordinate it and really was instrumental in herding the sheep as our first affordable housing task force was 24 members, and a lot of people. It was very easy to devolve into everyone's anecdotes about their experience with homelessness or houselessness and from whatever side of the issue they come from. So queuing to an agenda is really critical. Keeping that vision going and having a facilitator that can help craft that into the 5-year plan. I think that's probably one of your first tasks, and I encourage you to check out Jefferson County's. We're doing our first revision of it this year by November, and we stared and compared with a lot of other homelessness plans, and I encourage you to do the same and take what you can from ours and input your own data and your own matrix of the problem. Because every community is different. But one of the big successes for us was in giving up authority and making sure that everyone at the table had the same voice as we worked through the issues, and that the different perspectives were heard. And that's why a facilitator, especially in the early days, was really critical. We've redone our interlocal agreement between the city of Port Townsend and Jefferson County this year, and really kind of eliminated the task force. A lot of the advantages of the big table of the task force was getting all the voices and kind of filtering down to a plan that we could execute. And an execution of the plan took a smaller group. And so we brought more community stakeholders into kind of the executive board that we had. In our first iteration, we had a joint oversight board, which was a county representative, a city representative, and 3 community members. And now we've kept those community members, added more city and county representatives, and eliminated our task force. But we're still trying to capture some of the great, off-the-cuff conversations. We had so many conversations that seemed to go nowhere, and then after 3 or 4 of those, we developed traction and really get somewhere. And so we're still having those larger conversations on a biannual status or occurrence, and continuing the conversation with folks while the work of the Housing Fund Board now is really executing the RFP for the 178, RCW 3622, 178, and 179 funds. And we've also, as a county, councilmatically enacted the House Bill 1590, which gives us a 1% sales tax, not a carve out, but a tax, add 1% to 1%, which we did councilmatically, but we partnered with the city. And as I say, giving up some authority to make sure that we can maximize the pool of funds that we can get out there has been really advantageous. And I think this group is, our homelessness task force was really critical in getting over some of the tension that existed between city and county previously too. We're often at loggerheads over who has authority of this or who needs to make this decision, and bringing more people to the table and releasing a little control ended up with better partnership. And then as we evolve, we did renew the contract for our facilitator for this, I guess, fourth year of our housing task force, and we're just doing it with our county clerk and a smaller team. But as I say, trying to still capture some of the creativity that happened at the bigger table in an ad hoc fashion. So while the work of our housing fund board now is a lot of it in the box, just assigning those funds from 1590 and the reporting fees, we continue to convene the conversations with the larger group because we're getting a lot of traction on a lot of different areas. And the conversations that started at the Affordable Housing Task Force ended up pushing the county to adopt an emergency encampment ordinance, which really facilitated a project for one of our stakeholders, Bayside Housing. So there's a lot of work that comes out of this outside of the box that, giving voice to the other stakeholders, improve the outcomes for our residents, both with housing and security. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit now, so I don't know if there's any questions or anything that you'd like me to focus on. I'd be happy to go into more detail on any of the discourse I just had or how we're functioning now, but I'd love to make sure it's applicable to you guys' group.
I think the discussion about maybe if you were looking at it from a fresh set of eyes, is there something you would have done differently that might, kind of a policy position that you would have done differently that would make the overall task force recommendations more relevant or more timely?
As I said, I think a lot of the magic happened in some of the looser agendas, but I would still hew to a tight agenda and really keeping eye on the ball and kind of the first. You got to filter it down before you can expand. So I think lessons learned that we're enacting now is to make room for the larger conversations, but to get the work done. Sometimes those things have to happen with different groups of people. But I think it's critical where you are. I wouldn't have eliminated that giant group that our task force was, and it looks like you guys have 20 people around the table too, and I'm sure with a diversity of experiences and perspectives. And that group is really critical to capture everyone's voice into the plan and understand the dynamics. It's just we definitely wasted a lot of time translating that into 5-year plan. And so really focus on facilitation. That's my takeaway.
Anybody have any questions for Commissioner Brotherton?
Sure. I have a question regarding the stuff that you've done that has positively impacted your community. Have you seen that negate your open drug use, the people taking over your downtown area with camping, sleeping on the sidewalks, urination, defecation, open drug use, that type of thing. How has this affected that?
Sure. I'll point to one program that we did that was a little bit outside the housing task force, and it was one of those areas that traditionally creates a lot of tension. You know, some of the stakeholders at our table that were homelessness advocates during the state eviction moratorium during COVID, it encouraged folks to go out to our Jefferson County Fairground, which is run by a nonprofit that's owned by the county. And with the Blake decision and House Bill 1313, you know, it was pretty much the Wild West out there, and a really dense area in the middle of town that created, you know, I think there were 130 anti-harassment orders, property crime, and you know, drug overdoses and fatalities. And using our $1590 and with the partnerships that we formed at the Affordable Housing Task Force, we found another place and you know, facilitated the purchase of property and moved that encampment into an outdoor shelter run by our community action program. And so having all those stakeholders at the table and continuing to have conversations, even as our short-term goals were very different from the county and from the advocates themselves, we could find our shared goals and work towards those as a group. So I'd say the partnership there ended up in significantly better outcomes, both for the surrounding area of our first sort of Seattle-style homeless camp, I guess, and turned that took that same population and translated into a fairly effective outdoor shelter that is, you know, I mean, HUD just came out and looked at it, and it's growing now. We're looking for commerce funds to add to another moving our emergency shelter, which kind of has a tenuous lease. Another program is we have our first big affordable housing program with commerce funds that came, you know, community support for these programs is really critical to get funding, and the first $600,000 from our 1590 funds went to support that project after it failed in getting funding the first round, and that gap funding plus the advocacy of different housing advocates and municipalities to our legislature demonstrated the local support, I think, that really was the created the success of getting funding in the second round. There was a lot of tension between some of our different housing agencies about how money was distributed. So creating a table at which everyone could come to and work on the RFP process together to identify the criteria that we should use for our reporting funds created a lot more harmony amongst the different housing advocates or housing agencies that are often, of course, in competition for these monies, but serve similar missions. So, getting that landscape established and giving everyone a voice in the RFP process created a lot of harmony among our housing agencies.
So you were able to enforce the mechanism downtown and then migrate those individuals to that area with your police and your law enforcement agencies.
Well, it's that we didn't have any authority over people's actions when they were in an unsanctioned encampment. So basically creating the same infrastructure in a different location, but having it managed by one of our housing agencies, eliminated the need for, if someone was actually dealing drugs, then we could ask them to leave, which, doesn't absolutely solve the problem, but it creates harmony in the situation, so the outcomes are still better. We're still dealing with folks that are, most of them have been homeless for a long time in our area and don't do well, and even the supportive housing, many of them have been housed before, and whether it's because they have animals or substance use disorder or many things that don't deal with well in a congregate shelter or even permanent supportive housing, but have found real relief in this outdoor shelter, and many of them are on their way to being able to be housed in our 43-unit affordable which will be starting to house people in February of 23. And, half of those units are dedicated to people exiting homelessness.
Greg, did you get the financing from HUD, or how did you finance? And I read in the newspaper that you're getting infrastructure there now, so you're getting well or water plus electric,
Right.
probably sewer.
You're talking about the outdoor shelters
Yes,
specifically?
yeah.
Well, there was the windfall of support and ARPA and CARES dollars. So we purchased the property and we looked around for properties owned by the county or the city at first and couldn't find any that, weren't right abutted to another neighborhood that was pretty dense and other criteria like that. So we used ARPA funds to buy the property and start the infrastructure development. And then, because of our partnership with OLICAP, they jumped into managing the outdoor shelter. So we continue to use ARPA funds for the first year for operations and maintenance, which is, still fairly expensive. And, frankly, we're not done with the infrastructure. The septic is just going in this year. So they actually, the inhabitants, the residents, went from having showers when they were, crashing at the fairgrounds to having to get bus to showers or drive to showers. But, and I spent a lot of time there, they're much happier at this new, more rustic location, and we're just now getting the infrastructure finalized with an award from our 1590 RFP this past year. So our second round of 1590, 0.1% funding went to complete the infrastructure. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, what about, you mentioned HUD. Is HUD a partner or?
We haven't gotten a lot of, vouchers. They usually come through the Housing Authority, Peninsula Housing Authority for us. And for our 43-unit affordable housing building, we've gotten a lot of HUD vouchers, project-based vouchers. But we haven't had any HUD support for the outdoor shelter to this point. So they're very interested in the project, and it's kind of a promising practice in the housing matrix, kind of a different approach to some of these really intransigent problems.
So I have a question about the location of this new space. How far away is it from Fort Townsend, presumably, where you have many of the services?
Yeah, no, that's a really important issue, right? It's difficult to deal with neighborhood pushback, and I don't know, if I could end the neighborhood veto and all sorts of issues, I just would. Just because, ultimately, we found a piece of property that was kind of just outside the city limits, literally across the street from the city. And it had another advantage in that it's kind of between the city and an industrial park that doesn't have urban level development, it doesn't have a sewer to it, so it's really constrained in its growth. And it's been an issue of conversation for decades between the city and the county. Should we bring the sewer over and annex this area at Glen Cove into the city? So we had a second strategic objective in getting this property, and it created municipally owned land that connected the city to the city infrastructure to this industrial park that would really benefit from urban level infrastructure. So, yeah, that was a real advantage. It's kind of next to the paper mill, just outside of town. There's very, very few residences near there. So it's a 20-acre parcel surrounded by kind of buffer land for the paper mill that's out there. So it's great that we could achieve two objectives at the same time. And then in partnership with the city, because we're starting to think collectively, they purchased another property that we were looking for as a possibility for this outdoor shelter that is inside the city, already attached to urban level growth, but in their sub-area plan, there really was supposed to be, workforce housing, mixed-use space, and now the city's purchased that, connecting those properties to the industrial park, and are working with Habitat and other partners to create workforce housing there. So we're creating a diversity of housing by investing collectively as the city and the county together with, a single vision, basically. I mean, the city decided to buy this property on their own, each of us are acting independently, but we're including each other in our strategic planning and benefiting from it.
So did you have to change zoning in order to put this camp in?
Yeah, well, that is it's an open issue. So we emulated Whatcom County has an outdoor encampment ordinance that we did a lot of staring and comparing and creating our own. And we just finalized our permanent ordinance about that. It was an emergency ordinance that came just before COVID. And really in response to a wood tent village that another housing provider wanted to create to facilitate that. So we had a stopgap as a temporary facility, and we are pursuing a permanent path now, and we're talking about, there's a couple different paths that are in front of us, but we could do, and I'm not sure if this is analogous to your, development scheme, but we can do a type 3 hearing examiner permit to declare it an essential public facility and kind of evade the rural residential 1 to 20, which is what the overlying zoning is, or type 5, which is board county commissioner. Both of one of them is public facility, and there's slightly different term of art based on the type 3 or type 5 conditional use permit process. But I think that we're leaning toward the type 5, which would be county commissioner approval with a public hearing, since it's really, it's a political decision, right? I mean, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. Do we make this point of emphasis? It's not really at least in our analysis so far, something that we want to put in front of a hearing examiner, because it's really a question of values more than interpretation of the So that's still an open question.
Greg, I'm just curious to know, what are you using to track the data around this, and how are you reporting the successes of this? How frequently are you reporting the successes of this?
Well, it's we're in a little bit of a holding pattern right now because we're just finishing the final infrastructure. I mean, we have a waiting list to get into the outdoor shelter that's 100 people long, people that are, missed in the point in time count, that are staying in RVs, and people with back 40 and all over the place. So there's a lot of RVs that are looking to get into this place. We are participating in HUD's House America program. We're fully committed to the concept of housing first, though we can't always, create a no barrier housing. There's just limitations to that. Those are the values that we're aspiring to. But the reporting to date, for the 1590 funding, we have yearly report backs to the Housing Fund Board, and we hear from the agencies that are actually implementing this. The costs are still high as we ramp it up, right? I mean, we're right now at $100 a bed night, which is twice what our emergency shelter is, and twice what we can do when we scale it up. So we include this data in our House America spreadsheet that we're doing on out of the county, and then we bring it back to the Housing Fund Board with yearly reports on the metrics of success of these different programs.
So is it fair to say that you are trying to approach this with a housing first model, and then along the way we keep talking and then go up the line in the continuum to provide more housing? Is that a fair statement?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite understand the question.
Are we looking towards a housing first model as aspirational, and then moving up, continuing to work and talk after the task force is over to provide a continuum of services up and down the line, including housing, workforce housing, all sorts of housing? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I couldn't catch every word, but I think that is a fair statement. I will say that with our $1590, we put in our criteria, for the housing providers to talk about housing first. Housing first is a little criteria in that for 148 and 149 or our reporting fees. We use our 5-year housing plan as the criteria. So that was our kind of additional baseline. And as we develop the programs, yes. So I mean, like with our $1590 at first, we were really interested in capital investments, projects that would move the needle. And as we have found success, we're hearing more and more from our housing providers that operations is becoming more of a challenge. You know, it's great to scale up the services, but putting more people in temporary supportive housing, permanent supportive housing, puts a lot of impact on the agencies providing the housing. So I think we're going to have to switch our criteria soon to more operations support, which is the reporting fees have largely covered that, you know, for our shelters and temporary and permanent supportive housing already. But it's a gap. You know, you can focus on one or the other, but we don't, at least in Jefferson County, really have enough discretionary funds in these revenue sources to move the needle on units at the same time that we're supporting the agencies in service.
I have a question. So how long have the encampment been open, and what's your success rate moving them from the encampment into any kind of housing?
The encampment, they moved in on October 1st of last year, and this population, about 6 of them have moved, 10 of them have moved on. They, as I say, this is our most difficult to serve population. So our problem with all of our temporary supportive housing, and we have a lot of units throughout the county, is that, there's no rental. There are no permanent housing units. Most of our vendors, our agencies report having to move people out of the county when for permanent housing. So our success rate is not high yet, but I'm hopeful that when the 43-unit apartment building goes live, that some of the folks can get moved in there. And, you know, different agencies kind of hit different rungs of the continuum, right? And we're really trying to find perfect agencies right now to hit that missing middle of the workforce housing. And those are a whole different group of agencies, and these funds really don't cover that, right? All of these funds are 60% or below AMI. So with these, I guess I don't have the numbers to answer your question with specificity. We've had a lot of the different agencies, like from the outdoor shelter, those folks would go to temporary supportive housing at Bayside or one of Holy Cap's other units, and then move into permanent housing. But most of the people here do not have the capacity to manage. They need supportive housing. They don't have the facilities to manage permanent housing independently.
And what's your capacity in the encampment right now?
It's when we opened it with limited services, we just brought over the population that was at the unsanctioned encampment at the fairgrounds. When we're done with the infrastructure, which is imminently in the next month or so, we'll have space. We'll have 40 slips for up to 50 people. And we're working with some of our, there was a great wooden tents for folks that, they weren't houses, they didn't have bathrooms, but they had locking doors and a bathroom on the site. And then the same community group now is working to build more wooden tents for this outdoor shelter. So there'll be room for 40 RVs, wooden tents, and even some tents, and a couple bathrooms and showers, and we have families there as well. So that's the one barrier we have there, since we have families at the encampment. There's no convicted sexual offenders. We need housing as well too, but that is a barrier that we have, and it's hard to eliminate all the barriers for the harmony of the encampment.
Hey Deb, how what type of services, counseling, job skills, what do you have available for the folks there?
Sure. We have a volunteer MASH unit from our Jefferson Healthcare Hospital that goes out there on the regular to give preventative care. Discovery Behavioral Health in our community, mental health facility, goes out there on the regular. And we have a system called the Real Navigator, which is a free law enforcement substance use diversion. And they are there on the regular. We have a lot of partnership with both the Sheriff's Office and EMS. We made sure that they were stakeholders as we set up the encampment. So they're there to support the residents. And then we have food supply from our Interfaith Coalition, and a meal a day. Mental health services from DPH, and then those are the primary ones.
What about job skills?
There's we're working toward that. We don't have, I don't think, I'm not in operational control or day-to-day. I don't think we have a lot of job skills connections yet, but we have a recovery cafe in town that has been really instrumental in connecting folks with that. So we rely on a lot of partners. So we have a partnership with our Dove House's Recovery Cafe, which facilitates job skills there. And we've lost our workforce office, so we don't have a lot of workforce.
What percentage of the people that you have there qualify to move on?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
What percentage of the people that are in the camp would qualify to move on? Like, you were talking about the folks that don't necessarily have the facilities to be on their own.
Right. That's a good question. Some are just not inclined to live indoors. They're used to living outside. I don't feel qualified to answer that. We want to get everyone into permanent housing. I'd be happy to come back in a year and talk about our success in moving folks from the outdoor shelter at the Coswell Brown into the Seventh Haven Affordable Housing Complex. That's a real goal is to get those folks into permanent housing, but I don't know, it's going to be a struggle with a lot of the ones that I know that just have not been inside for 20 years.
Seventh Haven is the 43 unit complex?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have one, just a quick clarifying question. Did you say it cost about an average of $100 per person? Per bed in the encampment?
Right now, as we're just kind of finishing the infrastructure, yes, but that's the prices. If you have 24-hour, this is the difference between when it was an annexation encampment, you have 24-hour staffing, it just adds up really quick. And once we triple the number of people there, of course, that'll go down to $30 a bed night. So the same infrastructure, when the infrastructure is completed, the costs come down a lot, but scaling to that level has taken more time than we anticipated, and it's high operational cost right now, and that's why we aimed big with the project. Once we get those 40 units, and if we get the funds from Commerce this year to build the emergency shelter, we can get down to $20 per bed night for our emergency shelter, and also create some permanent supportive housing for some of the folks that have been in our emergency shelter, which is 90 days. They've been there for 7 years. These are seniors and veterans that don't have the capacity to manage themselves. So, costs are high right now.
What were your challenges setting up the emergency camping ordinance and somebody to run the facility?
Well, nobody wants an encampment in their backyard, and when you create an ordinance that facilitates that, everyone sees one in their backyard. That was the biggest challenge.
And find somebody to run it?
I'm sorry, say again.
and finding somebody to run it for you?
Well, I also serve on the Old County Board, and I was working with all the different agencies as they were coming through it. So we had, as we were dealing with the situation at the fairgrounds, I mean, we were dumping relief money into all the different agencies to try to mitigate the impacts and keep the health and safety as standards as high as we could. And so out of that, we could see the group that had the most capacity to run the shelter, and they run our emergency shelter already, so that wasn't as much of a challenge.
Thank you.
So I think I can speak on behalf of the group and say thank you very much. It's very helpful to hear from somebody who's been where we're at. And I really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. And thank you. I'm sure if you have questions, I'll shoot them off to you now that I have your email.
Okay, yeah, happy to email, answer the question, or attend again, and, I can even take a trip down there to join you, so happy to help you as I can.
Thank you very much, and tell Mark I said hello and thank him as well.
Okay, will do.
Thanks, Greg, see you Thursday.
Bye-bye.
It feels like Auschwitz
Yeah.
all over again. Well, that's what it feels like. I'm sorry. You're not worthy to be in our population, so I'm gonna ship your ass off to an encampment so you can be locked up, but not locked up. It doesn't feel good. I'm sorry, it doesn't feel good.
I didn't hear what you heard at all. No, neither did I.
Well, you've got those people that can go into the encampment, they're gonna pay $100, but that
Nobody's
doesn't
paying
sound-
$100.
No, it's
comes down to,
Okay, well,
another,
but that's only a percentage of the people that are on the street. What about the rest of them?
Well, the rest of them are mentally capable of going into some temporary housing that you all kind of support with, Colleen and Athena and stuff. So it's the ones that don't want to go into
Right.
that housing. They feel more comfortable in an outside environment, which they're, to be honest with you, they're already in an outside encampment. It's just that it's downtown in our business structure and our area. It has a negative impact on tourism and dollars and businesses downtown. So what I heard is they had, and Eric asked a question about location. We, on the other hand, have a prime location already that the city owns and that we could develop into this.
And Susan, I get what you're talking about. At the same time, I'm cleaning feces off the back of my stoop. I have people spray painting and living in the ditch. And so I guess my question is, how much of this do I have to deal with? And if someone isn't willing to work toward supportive housing inside and they're choosing to live outside, we're gonna have to do something so they aren't shitting on my stoop.
And I don't disagree, and I understand, and I've shared this up front, and I totally have sympathy and can agree. It shouldn't be that way, but it just, speaking from someone who was homeless and chose not to be homeless, and I had to sleep wherever I could sleep. I'm sorry, that was part of what happened. And if you shipped me to this, I would feel so degraded, even when, it just has that feeling. And I'm just going from my personal thoughts.
No, I
So
understand.
don't hear me, I get your problem, I understand and I respect that, because that is wrong. And we let people all day long, whether they're under 25 or not, come in and use our bathroom. And if I catch them trying to go to the bathroom in the alley, I'll say, hey, why don't you come on in and use our bathroom? And, wash up or whatever. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer, and I'm just giving
Do
my,
you think that maybe though, if there was this spot and there was an alternative that you said go over here, would it encourage maybe some of those people that weren't wanting to work on themselves to push them to work on themselves a little faster? I mean, there's always gonna be a percentage that's not going to.
Right.
I mean, I have the same ones in nursing, I see this exact same people on the streets, they're still around, but I'm just curious, because the fact of the matter is people are not gonna change until they wanna change for themselves. So you're gonna have those people that are continuing to do this.
I mean, I personally, I've been saying this for for months, or maybe years. We have to make the choice if we want them in the park or want them in the encampment. That is
Right.
the only two choices. And I don't think it would be degrading. I think they might think it would be nice to have a place where they could go, have porta potties, have somebody
Showers.
there to watch
Not be
them,
harassed.
portable showers, and, you know, somebody watch to make sure there's no fights. It's just two decisions, park or encampment. That's what we have to decide.
I have one question. I guess my fear of having a big encampment like that would be more RVs coming to Mason County. That is the first thing that pops into my head is, if we have an encampment like that, are we going to allow RVs to go up there? Because as soon as we allow RVs, then we're gonna get an influx, in my opinion, of people that are coming from Thurston County. And with that, and Grace Harbor, thinking about RVs makes me wanna cry if we get any more RVs in Mason County. And the next thing would be, who is going to monitor all that? Who is going to be the security? Because I watch even down at Brewer Park, we had to call Lawson back 4 times in a row the other day.
In an hour.
In less than an hour, it was like 30 minutes. And it was like, nope, during that time, it was interesting. It was interesting in a kind way to watch how many people that were so mentally unstable, that's what it boiled down to, it was mentally unstable, were coming and just walking down the road at the exact same time. So what is security gonna look like for that? To me, watching how many, officers were out the other day, there was 3 of them that had to keep helping over and over and over again. So without a designated officer or deputies that are able to go up there and help somebody that's a familiar face, like me or Tammy or Athena, to help with those people, it's gonna put a huge strain on law enforcement.
Well, I kind of think, because the subject of security has come up for Community Lifeline as well. And what I think for some of our clients, as far as, I think that having a mental health professional is a better approach, because somebody who's able to do that crisis intervention and to do that de-escalation or kind of, work through a problem from a mental health perspective is going to be more effective than somebody from a security guard's perspective who has no skills in that, because that truthfully will just escalate a situation more often than not. So I think having somebody who is trained in communicating with folks that are having a mental health crisis is going to be more effective.
So I'm not trying to thwart the conversation, but we're in the weeds.
Yeah.
And I think we really need to start thinking about, from a high level, like Jeff put on here, we really need to start thinking about, okay, can we agree that, I'm just throwing it out there, not officially, that one of our short-term goals is to have a homeless encampment. And then the partners come in, right? And we figure out how to work that. But really this comes down to having a recommendation.
I agree.
Okay.
So Colleen, last one, and then we'll start talking about the options, and then we'll review those options at our next meeting on the 11th before the Spotlight Shelton event, also on the 11th that evening. Okay? So Colleen.
I'm just gonna remind all of you, that's how Quixote Community started. It was an encampment, and it was actually managed by churches for 7 years. There was no police involvement. Churches only managed it for 7 years. So it is possible to do all these things when you have people in the community who want that.
Yeah.
And anything is possible for the City of Shelton. I know it is, and I know we've got people in town already doing this work, and we're trying to work together as partners to at least start somewhere. And I don't think there's any magic number that's gonna create the successes everyone wants instantly. It just doesn't work that way. However, at least working towards something and starting somewhere is a good start. And it's a good place to funnel all of this passion. I feel like there's passion from everybody at this table to get people housed, either because they don't want them disturbing their businesses anymore, or they're concerned about their mental health and fragility. But I think we have the right mix of people at the table, which is great, and I appreciate that the city coordinated this, but it has happened successfully in this area. We're living proof of that in the way that we started, so I just want to let you know that it is possible to have this kind of success as we go forward. But it does take time, and I think we all appreciate and understand that, so.
So, moving on to the recommendations phase, and I'll just say how I see this, and if someone, has a different view, then that's perfectly fine. But the way I see this is really in three parts, and then each one of those parts in subparts. So, one is mental health services. Two is housing, or a safe place to camp. And three is the accountability component. Now on the mental health services, there's a couple of different ways we can approach that. One is the Association of Washington Cities has on their policy priorities for the next year's legislature is support for cities from the state to provide those mental health services. And whether the legislature is able to do that or fund it, we don't know. We won't know until the legislature gets toward the end of what they're doing. But I do know all the cities in Washington State have supported that policy priority.
And the Association of Counties, we're all behind that as well,
Also.
so we'll be
Okay.
working with them.
Good, excellent. So we have that, so we have our statewide organization and us. I mean, that's something that the council put on their approved legislative priorities list as well. So it's not just the overall group, it's our city as well, and I assume our county as well. So it's a priority for everybody. The second piece of that is the encampments, and really the continuum of care. One of the things that really struck me about Commissioner Brother's presentation was he said, yeah, they have an encampment and now they're looking to expand it. Why are they looking to expand it? Because it's because they don't have enough of those workforce or affordable housing. They don't have that continuum, that step up, right, to get to where people that are capable, we mentioned there's people that are not, and we have the people like that in our community as well, but the people that are capable to actually do it. So that's that housing first piece that he mentioned, that we've talked about, housing first here, within this group. And the last piece is accountability. And one of our major issues, and one that frustrates our officers to no end, along with our police chief and me and the council and everybody else, is our, in the county, is our inability to put people in jail when we know they need to be there. And I'm not saying that we want to criminalize homelessness by any means, but there is a segment of that population, we've talked about it as part of this meeting, that 10-15% is the problem. The other 85%, 20% are not. They don't cause any issue, or many issues. So with that, kind of looking at the recommendations of all the things we've talked about over the last 5 meetings, is there's a couple of things. One, an emergency encampment. Two, is jail support, and that's something the council is going to be considering as part of their budget for 2023, and something we'll likely have to dip into our reserves to do. Contract with another facility, and the county is looking at that as well, so that we can actually put people in jail that need to be. 3 was the housing first model, and seeing if we can find some support with that through the Department of Commerce and through HUD at the federal level that was mentioned. Their Housing America program, I don't know much about, but after I heard Commissioner Brother talk about it, I'm definitely going to look into that. And then another one I had was funding, the ability to fund these programs. $100 a night is
Per bed.
per bed is a big number. And like you said, the costs will go down because the infrastructure is in place as you expand the beds, the cost per bed goes down, economies of scale. So
Coyote Village is a prime example of that.
So he referred to $1590.
Yep.
So what does that number look like for the city and county?
So the city and county entered into an MOU, and the county actually receives all of those city dollars and spends a significant portion of those dollars in the city.
But what does that number look like? I mean, because that's,
Is it the
2163? Those are kind of the numbers you're talking about using to help you pay.
Right, so there's the recording fees.
Right,
that go.
what's that look like?
So it fluctuates. Dave, you can answer this better than me, but it fluctuates because as your, it's the,
It's taxing the economy.
Well, it
Right,
is,
well,
but what
yeah,
are we
and-
expecting it for next year? I
Next year?
have no idea.
hey, you know, that's a very.
That's a great question, what
And
does it
I-
currently fund?
Right.
It,
And then-
it funds Community Lifeline, it,
No, what's the number?
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Do you get $1 million,
I
do you get
have
500,000,
Yeah.
do you get 750?
well, I think ours is
No, I
like
don't think
$16,000 or $20,000, the city's
Yeah,
portion,
that's
it's really,
Okay.
the city's portion is
Not
small.
For the city.
It's not as much as you think it should be.
Right, okay.
So, and that's the thing too, let's make the recommendations,
Yeah, it's not very
and
much.
then we can figure out what, the financing, the funding strategies to make those things happen.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to get in the weeds. One of my questions is, so we have short-term, immediate term, and long-term. And, you know, one of my questions is what can the city and county do to make it attractive for builders to build multifamily housing? And what can we do to make it pencil for them? Because we're gonna have to do that.
Yeah, so
It's-
one of the things that we have to work on
It's
is at the state level. Because right now, they have so many restrictions. Olympia Master Builders is a prime example of helping to, wanting to help to change those.
Yes.
Right now, they're telling us that we have to do go green, and so that's a huge increase in cost
Right.
for builders. So that, at the county level, we're working to make it a lot easier, and we're working with the city so that we can both have pretty similar building
So-
requirements.
From my perspective, for regional and national home builders, what they're looking at is certainty on time. If we can turn a building permit around in a month or a land use application around in 3 months, that's what they're concerned.
And if there's infrastructure. They
Yeah.
want to make sure that there's
Right, and
infrastructure.
then in City of Lacey, they're having a lot of success with waiving property taxes for a certain period of time, as long as a certain percentage. I really like.
And we have done that, we've had that program out for years, and I had not one developer take us up on it.
But didn't
Because
you
when
guys
it
say,
goes pencil out, it doesn't pencil out the same as if you just,
It doesn't
Well,
pencil
Margaret.
out the same that it does in Lacey.
no. And we've changed the zoning, we've changed the building height requirements to make it easier to get a third story on an apartment building. And we still have not been able to, we've not constructed one new apartment building in South Kingston County.
And that's because with the rents.
That's gonna change.
Jeff, didn't you say something that we were maxed out or, in the one, I remember some comment from one of these meetings about when we had this conversation, like in the first one or two, about the issue that we were, I can't remember what you said, I'm sorry, but like maxed out on infrastructure maybe, or something that's really negating, that they've looked at us and they go, oh, well, this is the stopping point because of, and it might be a state level.
So this is my background, that's what I did for 23 years before I came here. The infrastructure piece is huge. If you don't have water available, there are certain requirements, you have to have a certain fire flow, right, for each house through a fire hydrant. And if you don't, and that's one example of 1,000 of them. But if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how cheap the land is, it doesn't matter how cheap the fees are, nobody's gonna build it. Because they can't secure the fire flow. And the same is true for sewer, the same, for everything. The other part of it is creating a place where people want to be, right? All a developer is going to look at when they're thinking about filing an application, regional, national home builders, like I said, the ones that build 50 lot, 150, 400 lot subdivisions, they could not care less what the fees are. It does not matter to them. What they care about is time. And the fee portion of it, what they're going to do is they're going to look at the underlying land value. They're going to look at they're going to plug the fees into the pro forma, and they're going to say, can I make my minimum margin on this development? That's all they care about. So, providing the infrastructure is huge, and to be quite honest with you, cutting general facilities charges, cutting impact fees, cutting building permit fees looks great in the short term. It does absolutely nothing for the long term, because you can't afford to pay for that water line upgrade. You can't afford to pay for a new reservoir. You can't afford to pay for a new roundabout because you don't get the traffic impact fees. New roundabout increases capacity for the cars, right? All the cars that are going to come from that development. So that's how you attract development. And the only way that you're going to increase retail opportunities, which under our financing and budgetary constraints that we have here in Washington with the 1% cap on property taxes going up, the only way that you can get out of that, and you don't ever really get out of it, is building more retail centers. You have to continue to grow, otherwise you're going to die. That sales tax revenue is the only real revenue source that we can grow.
Well, Bill here's a perfect example of growth and how it should happen. So we've got the sewer there, so there's your infrastructure. You've got power, you've got internet, you've got all of that. We've got different apartment complexes that are being built up there in that area. That's gonna help with our workforce, housing, and so different stages, I'm sure you know. When I was growing up, or after I got married, I lived in a trailer park. And then I graduated up to an apartment. And then I graduated up to a house. And then I went back down to the trailer. But that's another story.
We all do that.
Right. But that's how we help with the housing issue. But making it so that people want to build those apartment complexes. That's a huge issue.
Look, I mean, we had an excellent opportunity to build workforce housing, but the community didn't like it, so.
That's part of the continuum.
It's very important that may have moved some people up the ladder and opened up other rentals for some people, that leveled out rents, I think, in town. So, I mean, we did have opportunity, and I'd love to see those guys come back and look at the project again.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. So, right now, we do have a 42-unit apartment, condo, I can't remember the exact configuration. Going to start construction, it's already got approval through the hearings examiner. Should be starting here pretty soon.
Where's that?
Right at the top of it. And then we
Is
do
that by the
have,
HUD homes?
Yes.
pretty close.
Yeah.
So the other, I've been working with a developer in the county, in the UGA along Spring Road to develop about 150 units up there, not too far away from one of those. We need rooftops because, like I said, rooftops produce new retail opportunities, which is the only way that we are going to get to where we need to go. So we're working with that developer. Anybody that wants to invest in the community, I'm going to make myself available as easy as I possibly can for them to do that. But there's other things too. Our development code committee is something that we've been working on to outline what the requirements of the code are, because right now it's very vague and it allows a lot of interpretation, which causes delays, which, as I mentioned before, developers don't like. Anyway, back to the recommendations piece. You had some.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think that the mix of this is great. Obviously, there's a lot of big items. Development of new units is a thing, obviously. Reusing or using motels and other structures that have not been used for a long time and repurposing them. Getting landlords to accept vouchers and housing from people like Tanya and myself, so that they can actually move on to a new unit. Those are all really good, but I think the most important thing you keep getting back to, Jeff, is we have to prioritize, because there is a huge list of what we could do to make this better, but we really need to focus ourselves on a top 5, start there and just keep going, because there's so much, it'll make your mind want to explode, especially those of us who are actually working with the population that we're talking about. It's really important to at least get the goals on paper and start working towards those goals, because there's so many different things we can get distracted by, but we just need to stay focused and follow through on
You've
those.
got to start somewhere. So what I'd like to do now is, let's hear the ideas for the recommendation to council. I'll write them all down. I'll look into, if they worked in other places, how they worked, that kind of thing, kind of the same thing we did with Commissioner Brotherton this morning. And then on the 11th, we'll bring all those ideas back, boil them down to between 5 and 8, like was the mission when we started this thing, 5 meetings ago now. And then we'll adopt those basically at our next meeting, present those to the community at Spotlight Shelton, and then we'll move on to the city council and the study session probably sometime in November. Okay. So what's the first idea?
I would like to pursue the housing first model as our aspirations. We might not get there, but that's what we should aspire to.
Okay.
I would go with emergency encampment, the 0 to 2 years, and I would go 2 to 4 years to work on affordable housing.
Okay.
I know my opinion's gonna sound a little biased, being that I'm working with Community Lifeline, but, before we can get to the emergency encampment and before we can go beyond that and build, long-term supportive housing, the shelter that is currently providing services to this population is struggling to keep its doors open and to have staff so that we can take care of these people. And I'm not getting much of a response from the community as far as needing more funding and support in that. We are working our butts off day and night to increase our capacity to its full 35 beds. We are currently stretching our staff as thin as possible with up to 20 people an evening and only one staff person on. And the Community Lifeline is the agency that is currently providing the care for that. So if we're not going to support the shelter right now, where are all these people going to go in the meantime before the encampment is built?
Next.
Well, mine, obviously, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if I had a magic wand that could wave anything, I would get us 1 or 2 DCRs for Mason County. Because nothing's gonna change really, and even if you move the encampment, the mental illness isn't gonna go away. You
What's
still
DCR?
designated crisis responders.
So we don't have anybody in our community that can detain somebody, so if we're in a true mental health emergency, there's nobody here.
Those are the licensed ones, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So I think we need to take a meeting with Justina at Capital Recovery and push to get our own.
And I think regardless of which one, encampment, fixing Community Lifeline, that should be in the short-term section. Because even dealing with people, the individuals you guys deal with in your space, to be able to call them and say, they are whacked out, and I don't know how, that's what they do.
And they're also gonna be able to push for, like we talked about, we joked around, it's terrible, but the milkman in town. He's got severely diabetic feet, he's in a bad way, and he's not cognitively altered enough to get the hand forced, but if we had our own DCR, that could push to get on the guard.
Because they can see it.
Because they can see it, it will go faster, it will just.
Dude, I saw that man's legs the other day. He's all open sored and fat ass ankles, and
He
I
drinks
cannot
rotten milk.
believe. Oh no, he drinks a case or better of soda too.
He does.
Dr. Pepper all day long, just putting him down.
So Jamie, do you have a number that we can all call? Can you give out a number so that we can push this, with everybody in this room making a phone
Yeah, I
call?
report that man 3 times a day, and it's not to get him in trouble or
No.
make him long, it's to get him
He,
help.
as Miguel says, we don't want him dying on the street, so what do we have to do?
Oh, he's the next one that will pass, for sure. As soon as it gets cold, he's
And
gonna
I
die.
100% agree with that, and I've been
Just
trying
talk
to get him.
someone.
So do you have a phone number right
I
now?
do, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
My brain's not gonna process it right now. Another thing that would be really awesome aside from that, and it is something that has been on the back of my mind, is another task force that's set up specifically that has crisis, adult protective services in it. And a lot of the services that are more for our elderly, because even if you go to the shelter, there is, there's young individuals, but really, the ones that we aren't gonna be able to get housed and stuff like that are our elderly. And
We need respite.
there is a huge majority of people that frequent the shelter, even outside, like the guy with the shopping cart, that it's not just gonna be crisis, it's not just gonna be the sheriff's office or SPD or anything like that. I guess they used to have a task force. I've been talking a lot with Adult Protective Services about it. They used to have a task force that had all that within Mason County,
but it didn't have crisis involved in it, and so it was just kind of stagnant. And if we had something like that again, it would push a lot of those forward, because you couldn't ignore the issue anymore.
So.
Oh, we have an area agency on aging, and that is, but
The task force existed, it was through Mason General Hospital, so, and it also, it took the healthcare aspect, and we all met, and then COVID killed it.
Yeah, that's what they said.
yeah.
Well, an area agency on aging doesn't
They were
really do much for people that are like houseless. It's more of already housed people, and they provide
They
care
are part of it, right?
Yeah, home and
Okay,
community
so
service was due to sign them up for
DCR.
USHS and get the aspects
Right,
that way.
and that's
So
what we
two
do.
new DCRs. What's another recommendation?
Well, this is, I'm gonna kind of beat a dead horse on this side, but a lot of the conversations that we've had in this room have to do with some longer term stuff, the 2-year out, the Kyoto Village, the work that you guys do, What we're kind of failing to kind of really circle around on and have a conversation about is what we have immediately going on downtown, like Melanie's talking about, George Blush deals with, Scott Bernard, myself, Holly Cahoon, that see this each and every day happening. Oh, she's not here, right? Oh, she's on vacation. So we also have to deal with that aspect of it. And, so how do we deal with that? We already have ordinances on the books. We also have other ordinances that we can pass. We have a shopping cart ordinance that we can steal from Federal Way. We have no sit, no lie, ordinances that, my wife has provided to City Council. We have members of City Council asking for that information. We have to deal with that aspect of it too. Eric has hit it on the nail on the head where he's talking about it's a mental health situation, and it is, because that's what we're dealing with.
So,
Which goes, hang on, Molly. So it goes hand in hand with, putting in a mitigation camp. Because as Jeff says, we can't enforce it if we don't have a way of enforcing it. But to not do anything is not the answer either. So maybe there is some citations that we can give out, and it's not jail, maybe it's community service that we do.
okay, so to take that, are there ordinances that need to be put in place prior to being able to move forward to temporary encampment?
The no camping on public property and the nuisance abatement camping on private property.
We've already done.
Were two of the most important ones, yes.
Okay. So that was is there more we should be?
Well,
do we need
the only
to?
one that
Does
I
that
can talk
need
about
to
is
go?
the shopping cart
I mean, I don't-
ordinance.
Shopping cart?
A shopping cart ordinance?
So can I change this real quick, just so I understand where you're, hear me, and it just popped in my head, so it works hard. Could we look at maybe a positive solution? So what about, and I'm just throwing ideas out, because because it's gonna cost money. If we pass an ordinance, we have to arrest somebody, that costs money. What about, Santa cans available that get serviced 3 times a week?
They're destroying.
The city did try that, but they were, the company that we contracted with for those things won't do it anymore because they kept getting destroyed.
Even being left there for a weekend for the
Farmers
for the
market.
farmer's market, they destroyed them. And they were locked.
Okay, so I'm thinking like, okay, so I would give hours to I would assign someone 1 or 2 days a week to watch a storefront that did nothing but bathrooms and allowed bathroom and water. I'm just throwing ideas out. I mean,
What about,
I think that should be on the list.
yeah, it's like, what is a
Explore
positive, quick
opportunities for
solution
for
that,
public bathrooms.
yeah, I
It
mean,
should be on the list.
that you can go, hey, did you know?
We also have outreach teams, we could schedule our outreach teams to shoot
Like,
people along.
who could be open during the day where individuals would come in and
We have
use
to
the
get people
bathroom,
out there in the day.
but
and
they're
then
not
they
allowed inside. So
Well,
you
then
have
that
an
needs to be an
organization
option.
that
I'm
could do
just
that
saying, there's-
immediately.
so
Let's
we've
think of
got
a
public
quick
restrooms.
Yeah.
I heard a great suggestion a couple meetings ago about lockers.
Yep, we have
Does
lockers.
everybody think that, does
We
anybody
have
think?
lockers. From public health.
And I'm talking, what were we talking about, that 40
lockers.
Yeah,
big
big
space walk?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the lockers would be good for when they're leaving, like telehealth and stuff like that, and they're not taking their meds
I think
anymore,
that
they have a
would
safe
go-
place to put them. So yes, there is negative, but there is positive.
I think that would go a long way toward dealing with the shopping cart issue, because the reason they have shopping carts, they don't leave their stuff, right? So I think that would go a long way toward solving that issue than anything else. So we'll look at both those
So on a shopping cart ordinance, we're not trying to criminalize the person, we're just trying to remove the cart from the situation, aren't we?
That's true, except that then it's up to the officers to start running out on the street to decide what the, what's this person doing.
I wanted to reiterate that there is bed space available at Community Lifeline that's being underutilized.
Sure.
They have a funding issue though.
But all this other stuff
Colleen, did you have
possibly,
another recommendation?
Yeah, I was, for sure, I think that the shelter bed should be expanded to 30. I also think Tanya should get some more rapidly housing funds, because I know you're getting some, but not enough. We're trying to partner with Community Lifeline to help take in veterans so that they can get them ready to go into our housing when our housing is ready, and the same for you too, Tanya. I think asking the existing providers in town to give you, the city, what are our abilities that we need from you or from other funders to get to a level that we can support more people. Because I think you have really existing partners that are doing great jobs. But if you need 30 more units to move domestic violence victims into once they're through your program, you tell us. If you have emergency room beds that you need or emergency shelter beds you need increased to, what is it and how much money do you need? Tanya, same for you. You have transitional housing has a wait list, I think 5 years long. How many units could you get just to get 20 moved out of there? I think that's important. You need measurable, immediate goals that we can do to quickly address what is going on. And that's one way I know we all have the ability to do that within our agencies. Give us a deadline and say we need this by this date of what you can do to help make this better in the next year. Because all of us have goals at our own agencies about what we are doing to improve this, and that's one of them.
Okay.
That's a quick, measurable way to get this accomplished.
Get good luck to that.
So with the shopping carts, I know, Dean, when you go in there and safely says, yeah, we want to be a victim, when we go there, they tell us, we just want our shopping cart back. And there's not much we can do. Yesterday, there was 2 officers on, and we took 37 calls in 9.5 hours. That's 37 calls we were taking for service suspicious, vagrancy calls, assaults, collisions. We were doing everything. We were short, and we didn't have time when the vagrancy call, that was triaged down to the low level when we have a collision outside the high school. We have people getting assaulted. We have domestic violence situations where it's an assault second where somebody was seriously injured. We don't always have the time that we can put 100% into a vagrancy issue. And being part of the community, living here, that part sucks for us because we're pushed to the max and just trying to get our response. The City of Shelton is growing, and our emergency response to things is taking up 99% of our time. Today, you called in a vagrancy at the park. Unfortunately, we had an assault that was going on that tied up both the officers, and then we had the meeting, and we had other things going on. So it took us some time to get there. Mr. Shopping Cart Man with the milk, we've dealt with him, and he does not want to engage with us. We try, and we call crisis, and we say, hey, this is what's going on, and they're like, oh, he's fine today, we're not going to do anything.
He's not going to make it much longer.
But on what Jay's is talking about when we're talking about the shopping cart, sorry, wave my hand for everybody. Basically, if a storefront that has shopping carts decides, or any store decides to be a victimless, it's a victimless crime, then with the ordinance of Federal Way, basically it states, look it up, and I know some individuals have, that there is a financial cost to that store. If that store then enters into a policy where they are not a victimless crime and they have a recovery process and they prosecute shoplifters and they do that, then they can opt out of that. But it doesn't have to be a police officer that goes to recover those carts and stuff. It can actually be a public works or a city employee, just like the ordinance is as it's written for the street camping and stuff. But then that removes a facet of them moving the garbage all around and creating an unwalkable or an unwalkability type of a structure we want Shelton to become a destination. We don't want Shelton to be just a drive-through community. So how do we do it? So I don't need new answers. Let's rob what's working from any other community that we can. Jane?
So two things, typically like with Lawson, I try my best to respond to calls like that say vagrancy. Oftentimes I just show up because I can see them pop up. And I'll try and go and connect with those individuals to see like, hey, why are you here? I try and steal Tammy all the time, but right now it's mostly just me as a navigator going out to these calls. On top of the other programs I'm working with, it is a lot. And another thing, when it comes to, citing people, we have a program in place already. We have our LEAD programs, our law enforcement assisted diversion. So if that gets utilized even more for these low-level crimes, we have 16 different crimes that we could do a LEAD referral into. One of them might be shopping carts, taking shopping carts, being cited for those things if law enforcement is available. Get them into the LEAD program. That way, when they go into the LEAD program, it gets sent over to the prosecutor, and if they're engaging in the program, they don't get charged. And oftentimes it is just that little bit of a nudge. Our one guy with the shopping cart, we are not gonna be able to do anything with. Not until he is detained and put into an adult family home. There is literally nothing any of us are gonna do for him. He's got way too much dementia going on.
Which
That
the
is
adult
so-
family home's gonna take them until they get that card.
So I appreciate the
Yeah, and-
conversation, but let's talk about high-level recommendations that this group wants to,
So I wanna
city council.
follow up on what Colleen said, and I think it's important that we do list as maybe in the intermediate goals. Cause I know we have the ability to put 12 units above our space, and we're $1 million short. We already have, almost 2 million, and I just wrote a grant for another almost million, but we're still short, but by the time that's done, that's 12 units. And I just pulled my numbers for the grant, so I know I can say this with we have 72% success rate moving our people from our emergency shelter into permanent housing. And we have a 96% success rate using our rapid rehousing dollars. So something we're doing is doing good, and I'm sure Tanya and you guys could give your own numbers. I'm just saying that we need to explore that a little bit further. Like what are we doing that's making that work, and how do we implement that? Because I don't follow the process that I have a 3-month limit. They stay in my houses average 8 months, and that's it, and they're in permanent housing. So anyway, that's just,
So support.
I'd like to see that what is exactly you would need to, and how many could you serve in permanent housing?
What additional beds are we this close to being able
Exactly.
to use
Like,
with additional funding?
right,
Is that kind of what you're
yeah,
saying?
exactly. So how much money do you need to be 30 beds? How much more would you need to add 30 beds? How much, and what would your capacity look like? I just think it's important that we have that as a,
Okay.
we're not
Jane,
getting infrastructure.
What's another recommendation?
Jeff, can we reach out to Frank with the housing authority
Yeah,
and find out how many,
So the
if they
idea,
have any empties?
yeah, so the idea for today is to talk about these recommendations, and I couldn't care less if there's 20 of them. I will take a look at what they are, and then we'll come back on the 11th, and this group will decide on a consensus what 5, 6, 7, 8 we're going to pursue. Okay, so throw your ideas out.
Mitigation,
Huh?
risk mitigation funds for landlords so that they will take vouchers. That way, they don't feel afraid to rent to people that they have the ability to.
There is a mitigation fund if you're being continuously housed through a housing voucher or continuously funded through like one of our rapid rehousing programs. The lack happens if it's just a one-time payment, but it's up to $5,000 is the state mitigation fund. We recently used it. I know that's kind of a penny in the bucket, but
Can you get it easily though, Tanya?
yeah, it actually happens pretty fast. A lot of photos are important and stuff like that, but there is.
Okay, so there's,
Okay.
what's next?
Hey, Jeff, and granted, this is serious, things have to happen right away, but we have to turn off the tap, and we've not talked at all about prevention. We have to figure out how to keep people from becoming homeless in the first place, or this problem is never going to resolve itself. And I think we need to dedicate resources to that as well.
More navigator.
Agreed, that emergency rental assistance saved our bacon
Yeah.
in this community. People don't realize how much money got pumped into that.
Is it the rapid rehousing?
No, it's the emergency rental assistance due to COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, there was millions thrown
And
into
that is gonna dry up.
Is that the cheaper
Within
app?
the next
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Okay, what's next?
Well, I think also if you're gonna have vouchers for people to go into apartments they can afford, but housing, whatever, you've gotta have somebody that's going to make sure that whoever is running that place doesn't discriminate and allows them to come in. Because I've seen it. They think they're homeless, they just don't wanna let them in. And there's people there that live there, they say, oh no, we don't want that, people living next to me, because they know they're gonna go in there. They're homeless, they qualify. You need someone to make sure that whether it's DHS or whoever, they follow through. If they have a voucher, then they're able to go into that place. And when you have people that discriminate, we got rid of ours, but when you have people that discriminate like that, that is keeping the people that need to get into places from having a home.
All right, we got like 5 minutes left, so what else we got?
Yeah, I think, Brett, sorry.
PR, you need to educate the public about what homelessness is, why it's caused, what we can do to support, because the minute they hear affordable or they hear
Probably more of a
homeless.
communications plan.
Correct.
surrounding
Transparency,
this.
so people know what we're doing and how we've been doing things successfully, giving opportunities for the different agencies at city council meetings to talk about successes that they've had. I think it's important because you didn't get an affordable housing project because everyone heard the word affordable housing and said, not gonna happen. If they are better educated, I'm sure, Dean, you probably didn't have any understanding about all the stuff we were doing, and we didn't understand your frustration until we were able to sit together with this and go, okay, we're all kind of on the same page.
It's kind
We
of
just
like,
have different ways to get to it. So I think it's important that, and you don't see us as, monsters anymore, people who are just trying to shove it.
Well, you're kind of scary, but.
so, that's kind of what this is about in the Spotlight Shelter.
And I think to continue these meetings and to let people from the public understand what is happening and what we're trying to do so that they're not fearful about what we are actually doing. We're not trying to encourage the growth of homeless people, even though people think we are.
Yeah.
We're just trying to do the opposite and slow it down.
Maybe quarterly. I
So-
have to continue to do this every 2 weeks.
No, I would agree, let's get our spotlight back on, I mean, at a more consistent basis. I don't know if there's a recommendation to, you throw it out there to all the builders, I mean, you got a builder on city council, you got, Blair and myself sitting here. There's some volunteer stuff that we could do, Susan, with, how much of the 12 beds, is it $400,000 that's labor, can that then be like?
Try $1.5 million.
Well, so, but if that's just your labor cost versus
Yes.
your material
Yes.
cost, then can we,
Volunteers.
can you throw something like that out there and use it in your
I
spotlight?
think that's what Colleen was talking about. How much, ask everybody, what do they need to achieve this?
Right.
And they'll be able to tell us.
Yeah, they have commerce
So,
dollars, so
what I have-
sometimes you gotta use that.
Did you write down more navigators?
I did. So what I have so far, Housing First is a principal. An emergency encampment, looking at an emergency encampment space. Affordable housing, which I think that and Housing First kind of the same thing, but maybe a little bit different.
They are.
Support for current shelters. One or two more designated crisis responders. Additional navigators. Shopping cart ordinance. Public restrooms. Lockers. The big things that Dave was talking about. What do we need to get the shelter on story? That's kind of that larger point, asking our community partners what they need to expand their capacity from us.
Could we get a grants coordinator, someone who can talk to all of us and say, hey.
That is, that's the county and us have a separate conversation about that piece outside of just the homelessness stuff, but it, grants for everything from this to infrastructure. Prevent homelessness, emergency rental assistance, which that fund is running out, but how else might we supplement it? And a public communications plan. What did I miss?
Could we just add respite care? I don't think that was identified. That's what I was gonna say.
And I think just on the topic of what Community Lifeline would need in order to increase our beds, Jefferson County mentioned that they're getting $100 per bed night Lifeline gives $50.40.
Well, they said
They said
it
it's
costs.
cost.
Yeah, they're not kidding.
Yeah.
They're kidding.
Well,
But he didn't say that.
But it's costing us a lot more money to take care of people too, with inflation and everything else, it's more expensive to care for these people, so I think that needs to be considered.
And can you be really specific with the DCRs that they're just for Mason County, not shared with
Yes.
other counties?
No,
That would very.
Dedicated.
This is gonna be,
Yeah.
this is gonna be focused on Shelton
Yes.
with, some Mason County.
I was gonna say,
Well, Mason County.
Another,
Well, that's a discussion we haven't had yet, but I'm glad you brought it up.
wait, what about Belfair?
So, any other recommendations? Because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take these and, do some research on each of them, and that's what we're gonna talk about at the next meeting, and then we're done.
When you say emergency, I'm sorry, when you say emergency encampment, is that the dedicated encampment, or is that inclusive, like of what they were discussing, or is that a different concept?
No, this would be a,
Mirrored on the-
mitigation.
Okay.
So on the,
So I
on
got-
the, on the intermediate, so we got the short term, we did an encampment, after that is done, then we're gonna need the enforcement. So I don't remember if that on the list.
No, well, yeah, the enforcement piece for sure. And that's something else. When I bring all these back to you next week, we're also gonna talk about, recommendations on how to pay for it.
Okay. One more. What would be nice is, because we are spending a lot of time working with Community Lifeline, is a full-time officer too with mental health.
Like an embedded.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
And have two officers, instead of having like a homeless advisor like we used to have before COVID, we have an officer who is armed, because I don't want to see an unarmed person out there dealing with some of these camps. One or two officers that are well known to the homeless, mental health, that we deal with a lot of them. They see a lot of the officers, and they know us, so they respond to us. We go through our critical incident training, our de-escalation training. I think having two full-time officers, and maybe at least one, if we're putting down a wish list, it would be nice to have
You wanted that?
kind of like a homeless task force within the PD in the city. Working that well.
So there is a, yeah, there is
I
a,
you wanna talk to them, I know the officers there, I'm sure
Okay.
they'd be happy to share a lot.
Yeah, I would love to.
the Washington State Healthcare Authority has a grant program for an embedded, crisis responder with the police officers. And the deadline for that grant is October 15th. This week, this week, I'm gonna be watching a webinar about what they're looking for, so I can put together their grant.
Oh.
Great. Yeah, so I'll be paying attention to that, maybe we can get some dollars for it. So an embedded officer with mental health training, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You were talking about getting into, where we were able to ship some prisoners to other, jail cells and stuff like that. So, I mean, what is wrong with, FEMA comes in and sets these trailers up to these different camps and things like that. I mean, is it less expensive for us to get a temporary, minor prison type situation on a piece of property, whatever, to be able to house some of these people and then go into the enforcement piece of it? Or is it more cost effective to?
There's all kinds, I wish Shane Hansen was here, but there's all kinds of things that go into having a jail facility. And once you hit 72 hours or more, the requirements go through the roof, which is part of the problem.
For municipalities, having a jail, the liability would be astronomical for the city of Shelton. One person goes in there and commits suicide, we're
I
out.
actually asked Chief Beeson to look into what it would cost to build our own jail. The cost by itself is pretty significant. So the WCIA, who is our insurer, the liability insurance that goes along with that is, we wouldn't be able to do anything else. But it's not like that's something we haven't looked at. We have. So those are the recommendations I have. That's what we're going to talk about next time. Anybody have anything else to add?
I got one last thing, and I'll talk really fast.
It just popped into my head when it comes to the DCR stuff. Anybody that's ever been involved with like getting somebody to the hospital, the biggest thing is, Mason General gets really overwhelmed going on site divert. If we had a way to have like a mobile phlebotomist somewhere that could do these blood draws on people or have it be really fast. However, Tanya, you might have suggestions, but
Ignited, we wanted to do the community paramedicine program, and
It
it
would
got
be-
shut down.
it would like
It was another
change
thing that would have been
everything.
huge, and we had paramedics that were willing to volunteer their time.
And secure
What's it called?
transport,
What's it
community
called?
paramedic.
Community paramedicine. So basically,
It's
it was,
it's gonna have to have legislative fix on that.
yeah.
So,
Alright.
That's what I'm gonna research, that's what we're gonna talk about next time.
And.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.